So with that, I'd like to introduce our next contestant, NeuroBionics, Dr. MJ Antonini. Round of applause for MJ.
All right. Thank you everyone for having me today. So my name is MJ Antonini. I'm the co-founder and CEO of NeuroBionics, where we're on a mission to expand access to neuromodulation therapy. Like many of you here, I have family members with Alzheimer's disease, depression, and substance use disorders. And I've seen firsthand how devastating those disorders can be. And I'm not the only one. Neurological diseases affect 1 in 6 people worldwide, stripping away patients' memory, mobility, and autonomy. The burden on the US healthcare system is astronomical, estimated at $1.4 trillion annually. And these diseases aren't going anywhere. Drugs are the first line of defense, but when they fail, powerful neuromodulation therapy exists, like DBS or deep brain stimulation, and they work remarkably well. Since its first approval in the 90s, DBS has seen tremendous growth with ongoing clinical trials for numerous additional conditions like Alzheimer's disease, depression, and stroke rehabilitation. The problem, however, is that getting DBS requires an invasive open brain surgery, which typically involves 2 to 3 6-hour-long surgeries while the patient is awake, with a metal frame bolted to their head. This surgery is so invasive and frankly scary to patients that less than 1% of the 24 million patients that would be eligible for this therapy end up with the DBS implant. That's an abysmal market adoption. But what if there was an easier way? A way to get to the deepest part of the brain without having to open the skull? There is one. We can use the pre-existing pathways to the brain, the blood vessels. Interventional radiologists place devices like stents and coil in the brain without opening the skull all the time. They deploy using catheter and that are navigated through the blood vessel. However, those devices are typically passive and they don't have the ability to deliver neuromodulation to the brain tissue. That's where we come in. At NeuroBionics, we are developing a device that can be inserted through a small incision in the neck and guided through the twists and curves of the vasculature. Once deployed from a catheter, our device hugs the inner layer of the blood vessel like a stent. And from there, it delivers targeted neuromodulation therapy to the brain tissue, all without having to open the skull. To make this possible, we've developed flexible bioelectronic fibers that can record and stimulate from inside the blood vessel. They are as small as a human hair. I'm holding one right now. You might not be able to see it. That's kind of the point. Our team has been developing this technology at MIT for over a decade. We've refined it and extensively tested it in small and large animal models, which led to a number of high-profile publications and a robust IP portfolio that we've licensed exclusively from MIT. So today, advanced neuromodulation is restricted to a few dozen major centers, leaving the majority of eligible patients without access. Instead of relying on academic medical centers that are sparse all over the country, our minimally invasive therapy can be delivered at thousands of regional stroke centers, bringing cutting-edge technology to everyone around the US. Our therapy is also 3 times cheaper than traditional GPS implants. Amongst the numerous clinical indications for deep brain stimulation, we've identified stroke rehabilitation as a particularly promising first indication for several reasons. There is a huge unmet need. Stroke is the leading cause of long-term disability in the US. 800,000 patients every year suffer from a stroke, with half of them suffering from long-term disability impairments that often translate into upper arm mobility impairments. There's recent clinical trials from the Cleveland Clinic that show that if you stimulate the cerebellum while the patient does physical therapy, you can improve the outcome of the rehabilitation. Another key reason is that the vascular access to get to this target is straightforward. There's a vein going directly to the dentate nucleus. Finally, in this indication, instead of having to stimulate for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, like for Parkinson's disease or epilepsy, we only have to stimulate for 6 to 8 months, which reduces the regulatory risk and time to market. So to double click on this, Today, stroke rely on physical and occupation. Stroke patients, rely on physical and occupational therapy to recover motor function, but that recovery typically plateaus after a year. With our device, the pathway changes. The device will be prescribed and implanted by the same physician that removed the clot in the patient, and then it will then deploy the device. The patient will then go home the same day and start physical therapy that will be supplemented by deep brain stimulation. That's this combination of deep brain stimulation and physical therapy that is key. The stimulation enhances plasticity, which then improves the outcome of rehabilitation. But what's really interesting is that the therapeutic window is very wide. You can go to patients 3 months that had a stroke 3 months, 6 months, even 3 years prior, and still recover additional motor function. We're following a B2B model, first selling to our implantable devices to large hospitals, where the majority of neurointerventional cases are currently performed. And more importantly, we'll be able to leverage established reimbursement code. So compared to the other players in the GBS space, ours is the only technology that can do deep brain stimulation without having to open the skull. The only competitor is actually Synchron. They also use a vascular access to get to the brain, but they focus on recording for the brain, and they are too big. They can't go to the deep brain targets. We believe the time is right for deep brain stimulation innovation. It is a rapidly growing market that is driven by our aging population and the destigmatization of mental health. And there are a number of new indications that are currently in clinical trial for GBS and that are expected to get approval in the coming years. And this market is ready to be disrupted. The technology for GBS hasn't really changed in the last 30 years. We went from 1 electrodes to 3 and to 8 with a little bit of current steering, which is not a lot of innovation in 30 years. Additionally, the same thing that happened in the cardiovascular space, where endovascular cardiology changed the whole field, is happening in the brain. It's now the 4th fastest growing medical specialty. In terms of a path to the clinical market, we'll follow Class 3 medical device requiring a PMA. We'll seek breakthrough device designation after our first in-human data and expect our first product, a GBS for stroke rehabilitation, to reach market in 2031. So since we launched last year in January, we completed a design freeze and are accelerating towards the first in-human study next year. We've secured VC funding and grant funding, and we've partnered with major hospitals. We've demonstrated deployment of our devices in the brain, like here, but also across the body for phrenic nerve stimulation and pacing of the diaphragm, vagus nerve stimulation, and stellate ganglia. We've assembled a world-class team with expertise in engineering, material science, and neuroscience from MIT. As for me, I trained in medical engineering and medical physics at Harvard Medical School and at MIT. And I've spent the past decade building tools to interface with the brain and the body. We're supported by leading neurosurgeons and key opinion leaders in deep brain stimulation. We also have experienced business advisors hailing from Medtronic, Covidien, and the FDA. So today, only 1% of the eligible patient population receive GBS therapy. But that's already a $1.2 billion market with a 14% CAGR. With our technology, we're making GBS safer and simpler, substantially expanding this market and targeting the rest of the 99% of the population. Focusing on stroke rehabilitation as a first indication, this is already a $4 billion market, just in the US. But our story doesn't end there. Our fibers are a true platform technology. We can do a lot more than just recording and stimulation with electricity. We can do light delivery, light sensing, temperature sensing, pressure sensing, everything in this single fiber. So if you couple that with the fact that next to the large nerve, there's a large blood vessel providing nutrients to the nerve, that means that once we have our first product to market, we'll be well positioned to go beyond GBS and beyond the brain and target additional market in the spinal cord interfacing and the peripheral nervous system interfacing. So in January, we closed a $5 million oversubscribed seed round, which fully fund our preclinical plan. And due to our momentum and investor pool, we are selectively reopening $3 million allocation dedicated to accelerating towards our first in-human data next year. $2 million of which are already claimed by our insider, Future Ventures, and $1 million is available for investments. If we win the $50,000 prize today, we'll use that to jumpstart our platform and indication pipeline, and also advance our IP package. We're also seeking introduction to the New Orleans ecosystem, investors, physicians, so interventional neuroradiologists, but also cardiac EP, and academic collaborators. So at NeuroBionics, we are developing a therapy with decades of precedent, deep brain stimulation. And we are deploying it through an established, minimally invasive approach. We are building the technology to make it possible. DBS without open brain surgery. So if our vision resonates with you, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
So it sounds like what you're doing, and I apologize, I don't know this therapeutic area nearly as well, the stroke, but it sounds like what you're doing is disruptive to what is existing today, right? Which is a different way of delivering the deep brain stimulation. So could you explain a little bit about how that disruption is going to impact the folks that are currently doing these surgeries today, and whether you have academic and key opinion leader support for this disruption?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So right now, all the DBS implantation are done by functional neurosurgeons. One of the major barriers to entry to this therapy, in addition to just the invasiveness, is the infrastructure. So all of those implantation are done in large academic centers, and the population of functional neurosurgeons is limited. So those physicians are already overburdened, and they are not seeking new patients. So one of our key opinion leaders is a GBS, like a functional neurosurgeons, and they really, really love the technology because they care for the patient. Like their workload is cannot increase further. The pool that we have is from the interventional neuroradiologist folks. That's a growing medical specialty. With I think they are about like 5 times more a physician in interventional neuroradiology than in functional surgery. And these folks typically have a caseload that is emergent. So someone has a stroke, they have to go to the hospital, get it removed, or there is an aneurysm that's going to burst, you have to go very quickly and coil it. So they want elective cases like this one, so that they can have a more even caseload in the future.
So follow-on question, because I think you're implying this already, is right now neurology is a money loser in pretty much every hospital across the United States, because unlike orthopedics and cardiovascular, they don't actually do high revenue procedures. So is the thinking here that from a health system perspective, this actually increases the revenue source because they can do potentially lower cost procedures, but still more of them?
Yeah, that's exactly that. Like the interventional neuroradiology is an interesting specialty because you can go into that specialty while being a functional neurosurgeon or a neurosurgeon. You can also be an interventional radiologist, so on the rest of the body, and then focus on the brain. But you can also be a neurologist and then do a specialty in interventional neuroradiology. So it's a very easy way for them to get into that space. And additionally, it's a lot easier to build a fluoro suite or like a cath lab rather than a whole surgical center for a theater for neurosurgery.
Well, without being crass, does the hospital make more money?
The hospital will make the main one, the AMCs, will then have a bigger caseload because we also open access to a number of patients. Like at the end of the day, even though GBS works really, really well, there's only 1% of the patient population that receive it because of the barrier to entry. So they will have more patients. And also in other hospitals in like underreserved communities, we also, yeah, exactly.
So, sorry, go ahead, please. I think the disparities piece was a little bit addressed, though probably would like to hear more on that. Yeah. Your data on the therapeutic window of it, within 3 months, 6 months, and you even said 3 years.
Yes.
Where did that data come from? Because you're still going into the first in humans, because the therapeutic window for stroke is not typically that long.
Great question. So we're not targeting a stroke. We're targeting stroke rehabilitation. So that data is from a clinical trial from Andrew Machado at the Cleveland Clinic. So what they showed 2 years ago, and right now they are doing their phase 2 and phase 3 trial, is that by implanting a GPS directly into the cerebellum, in the dentate nucleus, and stimulating that region, you improve the plasticity of the brain and you improve the outcome. And they did that in patients that had a stroke 6 months, 3.
But is that your technology?
No. So they use the same like mechanism, so electrical stimulation in the dentate nucleus, and we just have a different access route.
Right.
They have to open the skull. We go through the blood vessel.
Yeah, they're doing traditional DBS. I was just trying to understand how this directly linked to your mechanism of action and your delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So my question is a bit of a loaded question. I'm going to give fair warning. Medtronic is a $30 billion company that has pioneered stroke retrieval, DBS, and catheter-based therapies. Why are they not in this space?
They actually just released a paper like 2 months ago. They are exploring endovascular neuromodulation. It was in sheep. It was preclinical data, and they were going after the, I think the ANT, like the anther nucleus of the thalamus. So they are getting into that space. I think they got a lot of, they followed the rise of synchron that showed that endovascular access to the brain is possible and safe even long terms. And now they are slowly getting into that space. But we have a number of patents that cover our technology. We also have a different approach with respect to the manufacturing process and the deployment. So they're getting there.
And then, sorry, just one more, which is, and I apologize, I know you guys are time crunched, so we went a little quickly through it. I'm interested by your clinical evidence path.
Yeah.
So you have a proof of concept, because breakthrough PMA is not an easy clinical pathway to go through. So you're going proof of concept to feasibility to pivot to pivotal. Help me understand what that looks like from a scope and an investment perspective.
Yeah, great question. So right now we are, so the additional raise right now we're doing at 3 million is to do a first in human outside of the US that will show proof of concepts. So it's going to be deployment of our device into the vasculature, targeting a nerve, and then we're going to show safe deployment, safe stimulation, target engagement, and safe retrieval of our technology. That's the first one. After that, we're going to follow the IDE path in the US, do early feasibility studies. So right after the first human, we're going to have to raise Series A that's going to be between 15 to 35 million, so that we can do our early feasibility studies and part of the pivotal, and then another Series B that will do the rest of the pivotal and then the commercialization. At least that's how we've been thinking about that. The number that are like might seem a bit low, but that's also because we're going to announce in 2 weeks at SFN a commercial partnership with like a pretty well-known company that sells devices for neuroscience research, and they will resell our devices to their existing customer. That's a way for us to generate early revenue that will then be fund the clinical path. Okay, so I'm just sorry, I'm just curious, just the investment path through. So what you expect to raise? What now? What on the? So right now we're doing 3. Yep. Then it's going to be like 25 on average for the Series A. And then for the Series B, most likely like in the 60 million. That's the current thinking. To get regulatory submission and regulatory approval. Yep.
So you focused on the technology of the device itself, the wire. Tell me about the programmable. The other end of the device, right? Yep. Whether you guys are working on it. The other question or concern I would have is that's also a limiting factor to DBS. So it's not only the surgery, but there are only a limited number of movement disorder neurologists that can program that and see patients. And I'm wondering, do you deal with that to give the broader access, or are you just creating another funnel point or problem? No, that's very good question. So right now we haven't done any internal development for the IPG. Most of the IPG out there, even for like Medtronic and Boston Scientific, they all come from the same CDMO company. So those are the Cambridge Consultant of the world and the Integer. So we're like in conversation with them and going to work with them. Our current understanding is like the limitation for the therapy is less so with the IPG, but more of the targeting of their lead into the right target. So that's why we also have a mission to like have an IPG that will have like all the bells and whistles, so like rechargeable. We have a unique material for stimulating, which is a carbon-based electrodes. They have like
much better electrochemical properties than the classical platinum and platinum iridium, because they have a wider window that's much larger, and we can stimulate at the same current but from a lower voltage difference. So our battery pack are actually going to be smaller than traditional IPG.
I have a question about the variability of vasculature, and you could end up quite close to your target in some patients and a little bit farther. Have you done animal models to suss that out? And then, a related question is whether you need to show safety even in your initial, this $3 million budget to get to an IDE package, whether you need to show in animals at least that you don't have some flow issues that could be clot forming. Because, if you have to place a stent in there, it's already because you have to deal with a big issue. Now you're introducing something and a risk.
Yes. So the first part of your question was on, can you repeat the first part of the question?
The first was the variety of vasculature.
Oh, the variety, yeah. So that's a very good point. We are in the venous side, so it's even more variable than the arterial side. That's why there's going to be a lot of pre-surgical planning that will happen. So we're going to have an MRI, and that will be then co-registered with scintigraphy, just angiography, and that's where we will be able to screen patients where the vasculature goes to the targets. And right now we've been working in rabbits and also pigs. We've done pretty much an animal a month, or 2 animal a month over the past 10 months, deploying our devices. So yes, there is going to be a lot of planning involved in that. For the second part of the question, which was the safety. So safety has been one of the main consideration as soon as we started developing this technology to the clinic. Right now we're using already approved FDA-approved antithrombotic coatings. That's a polyurethane classical-based antithrombotic coatings. And we're doing our own studies internally and externally. We just sent everything to our an external biocompatibility house to validate all of that. The Series A will have actually 3 data packages. There's going to be the first in human. That will just acute deployment and safety and proof of concept. There's going to be a platform dataset showing that we can deploy and simulate across different targets all across the body. And then there's going to be a long-term implementation with a longer safety profile.
Great job. Fantastic. Good question.
Yep.
No worries. Cardiovascular comorbidities, right? Heart failure immediately comes to mind. And there's a stigma with the minority population in particular with respect to certain types of procedures. Opening it up to those who are qualified, that's one side. But on the other side, have you thought about that with respect to engaging with stakeholders? How would you address that from a disparity standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are at the beginning of our path. We've started a company 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So we haven't pushed a lot of conversation. We were engaging patients as well, and pretty much every stakeholder of the ecosystem. Stroke rehabilitation is one indication. We are interested in a lot of other indications. Some of them are in the cardiovascular space as well. So there will be some exclusion criteria for therapy, and so that we won't be able to serve everyone. But I think what we're excited about is this opportunity of platform technology that decrease the barrier to entry to this neuromodulation therapy as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you.